are very grateful to the Museo del Novecento for hosting us today. And our welcome, together with Professor Gabrio Forti, is to our third multipolar conversation of the New European Bauhaus project of Università Cattolica, entitled Beauty NEB Builds Community Aesthetics. And our project aims to highlight the key role of beauty as a resource for building community relationships and inclusion, and as a quality-generating experience and a dialogue between the built environment and the ecosystems. Our third multipolar conversation today will offer new perspective on the art of the encounter, building a beauty that builds an inclusive and just environment, and will be led by Professor Claudia Mazzucato, who's a professor of criminal law and restorative justice at Università Cattolica, and a restorative justice practitioner herself. But now let me briefly summarize the key contents emerged from the two previous multipolar conversations of our project. And they are available on our dedicated website, unicat.it/neb. On November 24th, we deepened the concept of building inclusion through the experience of beauty in a panel discussion moderated by Professor Ruggero Eugeni, which welcomed a community of international scholars, even from Australia, you'll see, and artists, sharing new perspectives on how visual and media arts can contribute to build a sustainable and beautiful inclusiveness within urban public spaces. The second multipolar conversation was entitled Building a Multi-Ethnic Carbon-Neutral Society, led by Professor Ilaria Beretta with the Postgraduate School for Environmental Studies of our university. And this conversation welcomed panelists from 5 continents who shared the circular traditions of their countries and showing how sustainable societies should be at the same time innovative and aware of their past traditions. Today, the table of many voices closes the first cycle of our multiple conversation. But Università Cattolica's project, NEB Builds Community Aesthetics, will expand further from January until May. And in January, we will launch future labs, which will build on all the ideas and findings and practices emerged from the multipolar conversations in order to co-create innovative spaces involving citizens of different age, groups, gender, culture, as well as associations, policymakers, and of course, artists. Mission. Finally, our mission and goal in crafting this project is first and foremost a desire to create capacity building through the sharing of all that we understood and researched on these issues. So it's not about a conversation among scholars, but it's about our desire to empower individuals and communities through knowledge transfer. And now the floor to Professor Claudia Mazzucato and this lovely panel. Enjoy.
Welcome to everyone, and thank you for following us today in this multipolar conversation. We are in Milano, in the Museo del Novecento. We have the Duomo di Milano behind us. So we are in the very middle of beauty and art, and we hope to be inclusive and have you close to us today. Let me briefly introduce you to our panelists today. We have Guido Bertagna, who is a Jesuit priest, but he is here in his capacities as an artist and as a restorative justice practitioner, and he is from Italy. Then we have Brunilda Pali. She is researcher in social and cultural anthropology at KU Leuven in Belgium, and she is a board member of the European Forum for Restorative Justice, also based in Belgium. Then we have Gabrio Forti. He is the academic director of the NEB project at Università Cattolica, but he is also the director of the Federico Stella Graduate School of Criminal Justice and is full professor of criminal law and criminology at Università Cattolica. So let us get immediately into our conversation. The motto of the NEB project is shaping more beautiful, sustainable, and inclusive forms of living together. The three keywords, beautiful, sustainable, together, seem to have little to do with conventional justice systems. Conventional justice systems, on the contrary, tend to separate the conflicting parties, tend to separate the victim from the offender and the offender from both the victim and the community. Conventional criminal justice systems tend to be unsustainable in terms of both economic and time costs, not to mention the high human price paid to justice in terms of suffering, in the privation of liberty and other fundamental rights. Conventional criminal justice systems have little to do with beauty and aesthetics. And actually, these words, beauty and aesthetics, sound almost like an insult in front of courtrooms, prison cells, penitentiary facilities designed not to be beautiful. So is there a possibility to shape more beautiful, sustainable, and inclusive forms of justice? And when I say forms of justice, I also mean ways of living together. We think there is a way to shape more beautiful, sustainable, and inclusive forms of justice. And we say so because we met this other justice. This other justice is called restorative justice. It is recommended by the United Nations and the Council of Europe. And also the European Union encourages member states to use it. This other justice is internationally defined as any process in which those harmed and those responsible for the harm, and where appropriate, any other individuals or community members affected by an offense participate together actively, if they freely consent, in the resolution of matters arising from the harm with the help of an independent, impartial facilitator or mediator. I underline, in the definition we have these words, participate together actively, no separation. Restorative processes begin in the very place and at the very moment where and when injustices occur. When those harmed and those responsible for the harm strive for justice, strive to be treated justly and fairly, strive to be recognized and respected in their equal human dignity, no matter how culpable and accountable they are, or how innocent and vulnerable they are. Today, art will be our navigator and our mediator in this journey towards art, justice, and living together. Art will lead us into what we hope to be a deep journey at the discovery of this other justice, whose attributes are not a blindfold, a scale, and a sword, but beauty, sustainability, and inclusiveness. And we have a video to introduce all of us into this other world.
How do we imagine justice? It's not a secondary question. Every plan, every desire, and also every change start from imagination. Only through imagination we can get over the present, trying to imagine and to understand the future. So how do we imagine justice? I think this very intense and harsh, almost wild sculpture can help us. We've got another old, explicit icon for justice, the very famous blindfolded woman holding a sword in one hand and a scale in the other hand. This is not the right place now to deeply address the question, but there are certainly many doubts about this traditional icon. For instance, how can it tell us about the real feeling toward justice? And how really human is that feeling? Nevertheless, at the very beginning of our human experience, if we do not know what justice exactly is, we do for sure remember and know very well the experiences of injustice we went through our life. If we start from the universal experience of injustice, we can also feel the desire and longing for justice, or better say, the thirst for justice. That's why Arturo Martini's artwork can help us imagine justice better. Arturo Martini was born in August 11, 1889, an easy and restless youth. He leaves school very early and starts working at the manufactory of artistic ceramics. Between 1909 and 1913, he travels throughout Europe, particularly Monaco and Paris, where he can meet the most important artistic innovations in those lively years, especially in Paris. Back in Italy, Martini seems to have been an active supporter of the Futurist movement between more or less 1914 and 1918, during the First World War, as well as other artists very important in Italy and in Europe, Fortunato De Pero, Ottone Rosai, Giorgio Morandi, to mention a few. He moves from vigorous researches on classicism and modernism, from Greek and Roman to Etruscan, and also from futurism to cubism. However, he then returns to a more traditional style, up to the end of his life, when his final works are on the border of abstraction. He collaborates with Valori Plastici, an important journal focused on metaphysical aesthetic ideals and classical sources. In 1925, he's invited to the Rome Biennale. In 1926, his first attendance to the Venice Biennale. Then from 1931 and 1937, he's got many public works, monuments, public buildings for Milan, courthouse, churches, universities, Arengario, where we are, Ospedale Niguarda, Cagranda, Cimitero Monumentale, Palazzo di Giustizia. These works were likely facilitated because Martini became the semi-official sculptor of the fascist regime between the two wars. His artistic inspiration is always something that flows from a suffering and troubled mood. His last years are a time of uneasiness and crisis that push him to describe sculpture as a dead language. It was a very troubled moment, his final years. In 1947, March 22, Martini dies in Milano. Then, carried out in 1934, the Thirst is shown for the first time at the Quadriennale di Arte di Roma. Its harsh and almost savage expressionism deeply impacts the public. Its immediate, direct inspiration comes from a visit Martini did to the archaeological site at Pompeii, November 1931. In 1932, Martini does the first sketches and studies that are still directly linked with the former sculpture La Lupa Ferita, a sculpture shown in Torino the years before, 1941, causing, by the way, a big fuss. Here, as we can see, a woman taking her baby by her side is thrown at the ground, searching for water. It's strange lies in the contrast between the tension, which tells us of her eagerness, her strong desire, her struggle not to die, and the motionless of the instant that captures her movement and gives her tense body and gasping breath, we almost can hear it, an eternal value. At any rate, the sheer strength of this cultural group lies in the fact that it doesn't show us simply a mother with a child longing desperately for water. The very strength is indeed not upon narration, and much less on an anecdotal manner or a detailed dramatic event. Instead, it is about his symbolic value. This cultural group makes us feel the presence not just a person's longing for water, but the thirst itself. From this choice comes its strange that it reaches a universal level and the credibility of the universal. Thirst, like famine, is the princeps analogatum of every wish to live, every experience and every journey toward what makes us live. This is the reason why we usually talk of thirst for love, thirst for knowledge, and of course, thirst for justice. At this point, the words of the Gospel according to Matthew cannot but be recalled. One of the 8 blessings or evangelical beatitudes refers exactly to the thirst and famine for justice. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for justice, for they shall be satisfied. The biblical pages talk about thirst a lot. We could think about, for example, Ismael's thirst. Ismael, Abraham's first son, the one Abraham had with Sarah's servant, Hagar. Ismael's thirst is the same thirst of the persons who are shut out, the underdogs of our society, who mourn and cry aloud or whisper desperately to be recognized in their right to exist. Or we could recall Jesus' request to the Samaritan woman at the well of Jacob at the hottest hour of a day. Starting from his great thirst, Jesus leads the woman to become aware of another thirst she profoundly feels, the thirst of love and the thirst of truth. Moreover, following John's Gospel, we could remember the final "I thirst" Jesus whispered from above, from the cross. In John's Gospel, those are the words that Jesus says immediately before death, when it's all accomplished. Arturo Martini's sculpture, therefore, opens up to a broad and deep landscape. It makes us feel an intense thirst, which is also a thirst for justice. But it's precisely this strong feeling that leads us to find water. What makes the desert beautiful, the little prince says, as we all remember, is that it hides a wheel somewhere. So what we need and feel like a lack makes us also look for what leads us to find it, just like Emily Dickinson taught us with her verse, "Water is taught by thirst."
What is surprising is that Arturo Martini's sculpture is not about a thirst for justice, but is about thirst. But it's that kind of multidimensional character of art that makes us talk about the thirst for justice, starting with his work, without betraying his deep intention, his deep feeling. So that's why I want to ask Brunilda a reflection about this, how art can help us to feel and to go deeper in our reflection.
Thank you, Guido, for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We are really grateful for your presence. So, yeah, I have to say I find it quite touching to hear that such a communicative, evocative, and poetic artist actually found that sculpture is a dead language that cannot tell or cannot speak, because I find that nothing speaks like this work of art. And what I find truly amazing about it is actually the potentiality that is created between this concrete expression or expression in concrete, in very literal terms, and the infinite affective and imaginative horizon that it opens in each of us. It is, in other words, exactly through the concrete language that infinity becomes possible. To tell of the living, the artist uses something dead. To tell of the infinite, he uses a finite. And the work, as you mentioned, Guido, is literally multidimensional. So each of us can see something else in it. And we can each see different things every time we look at it. So it does not seem to me, a little bit in the line of what you were saying, it does not seem to me that the artist is trying here to represent an idea that has to be understood. It does not seem to me that the work of art here has anything of the ideological. What happens here is also different from simply a description of the world as it is. So this work of art in a way creates the world but also transcends it. And by doing that, it seems to me that it remains on the register of the poetic and the spiritual. And therefore it's something to be perceived, experienced, accepted, and then responded to. The artist seems to communicate to us as if through a revelation. So in that sense, although this work is perhaps based through and through on his subjective experience, he also seems to function as a messenger. So using the meta-language of art to communicate a yearning, to bring a vision, to bear on reality, to create a spiritual bond with others. So art for me elicits, accentuates, and amplifies this quality of belonging to the larger universe in which we live. Through art, we are also introduced into a world beyond this world. So we are in a way carried beyond ourselves to find ourselves. And as you said, Guido, thirst appears here indeed as something metaphorical. It speaks of a need, a desire, a drive, a passion, an ideal, a longing, a yearning, which is different for each of us. And as you were speaking about thirst, I heard music playing in my head from Tracy Chapman's song, "All That You Have Is Your Soul," where she sings about her mama telling her not to be tempted by the shiny apple, to hunger only for a taste of justice, to hunger only for a world of truth. Because all that you have is your soul, she says. Now, saying that all that you have is your soul might sound like saying you don't have much, but actually what she says to her daughter is that by having your soul, you have it all. I find this really important because it suggests that there is something we can trust about our soul and its longings and yearnings for justice, love, truth, to protect and safeguard us from chasing illusions that might shine but do not nourish. And Salvadorian poet Roque Dalton writes, "I believe the world is beautiful, that poetry is like bread for everyone." And lack of nourishment or malnourishment of our souls might seem trivial in relation to everything that happens in the world around us. But in my view, it is tightly linked to the violence, injustices, indifferences we perpetuate to ourselves, to other humans, to nature, to more than humans. Our soul's thirst and hunger is aspirational and insatiable too, but we try to fill it with limitless and trivial materialities and distractions that we are sold as nourishment by an army of illusion makers. And it is that distraction which does not allow us to recognize injustice when we see it. It is that need to fulfill our hunger and thirst that lead us to wrong sources of joy and fulfillment. It is the search for a limitless and for a hubris that lead us to create wrong and wicked relationalities with others and with our environment. So instead of relating through respect, wonder, gifting, reciprocity, empathy, love, we relate through fear, violence, domination, exploitation, and exclusion. So I think both Martini and Tracy Chapman's mother then are right. The thirst and hunger of our souls are important, and we should nourish them with truth, love, and justice. But how does art more concretely nourish our sense of justice, especially when thought of as an encounter, real or symbolic, with another? I think we will be talking further about this, but I will mention for now just two observations which I find relevant. The first one is that art can be unsettling and expanding for our views, for our understanding, our horizon, and our imagination. Art might be perhaps the best safeguard we have against banality, against impoverishment of thinking and feeling. There are no ready-made and taken for granted stock stories in art. There are no dangerous classifications, there are no shortcuts, there are no simplifications. So art has for me this unique capacity to unsettle these and therefore to open up experience to new ways of seeing, of being, of becoming, of relating. The second one is something I hinted at before, so the relation created through art between the specific and the universal. It seems to me that beauty as created by art does not work through generalities, but depends very much on the attention towards the specific, the particular, the personal. But this attention to the specific also stands as a reminder that those details that make one human are also universal. So the beauty of art is that it helps us in the work of addressing injustice by requiring of us constant affective openness, sharpness, and depth, but also by creating some kind of fundamental symmetry of everyone's relation to another. So particularity and individuality in art are never a justification to separate from each other, but as an invitation to realize our common humanity. So art, in other words, creates the form, the means, the language to genuinely celebrate human plurality.
When we look at this sculpture, we may all think that we've been there, low on the ground, striving for something that is important to us. Now I will give the floor to Professor Forti, to dear Gabrio, asking him as a legal scholar, is there a thirst for justice? And if so, what is it made of?
for justice is quite common among human beings. As Claudia said, people strive for justice. But it has always been extremely difficult to define justice in the history of mankind. It's much easier to define what injustice is. It's much easier to be aware if an act of injustice has been committed, as Guido has told us. But in spite of the difficulty to define justice, I think that we can define some prerequisite of justice, a kind of genealogy of justice, we could say. For instance, there cannot be justice without understanding, without comprehension of the singularity, of the singleness of each case and of each person involved in the case. Even legal practitioners, either lawmakers, judges, prosecutors, or lawyers, should always find the right balance between the legal rule, the general abstract law, and the single case, and the singularity of people involved in the case. And to provide this understanding and comprehension is required, a particular capability is required, namely the ability to pay attention, A famous American writer, Susan Sontag, once wrote that we are moral human beings insofar as we are capable to pay attention. When we pay attention, we don't simply look at people, at the world, but we see them. When we pay attention, we not simply hear the voices of the world, but we listen to them. And here's the role of aesthetic experience, of the enjoyment of art. Aesthetic experience, enjoyment of art, is an enormous, a great announcement of our capability to pay attention. When we are in front of an artwork, when we are in front of something beauty, we stay almost breathless. We open inside us, within us, a kind of space, a space of silence. A space of silence where we recreate with our mind, with our imagination, what has been created by the artist. And the same happens when we do deep reading. You know, deep reading. When we read high literature, a good novel, a story, we are fascinated by a word, by a character, by a story, and stop, and we think, and we recreate the story, the character in our mind. Once Franz Kafka said that a good book is worth reading only if it is an axe which breaks the sea ice within us. Thus, the aesthetic experience, art is a great trainer for our capability to pay attention, but it's also a way to allow us to add something beautiful in our daily experiences. Also, the normal, the drab experience of every day can become more intense, also more relaxed, when we are able to see in this drab experience in something beautiful, or we are able to add something beautiful to that. Because art, as Joseph Brodsky, a Nobel Prize writer, many times said, art is safe. When we are in front of art, we feel safe. We can relax. And so always, many times, Joseph Brodsky said, beginning at the speech for the Nobel Prize in 1987, that aesthetics is the mother of ethics. And I would say aesthetics is a mother of ethics, is the grandmother of justice. through the daughter's attention, understanding, comprehension. And there is no community without justice. No one can feel part of a community when he or she feels that this community is treating him or her unfair. So we could also say that aesthetic experience, art, beauty, yes, is the grandmother of justice, but is the great-grandmother of communities. And that is my genealogy of justice. A good family, a good extended family indeed.
Thank you very much. Gabrio, you underlined how attention and care are common to both aesthetics and a just justice. And you pointed out how paying attention to others is a basis for just relationships. But we all know how difficult and sometimes how not beautiful, not sustainable living together might be or might appear. Our urban context show it very well. We often do not like living together with our neighbors, our difficult others, because of what they did to us, or because of what we think or pretend they did to us. Because of the ways they live, how they dress, the smell of what they cook and eat, the sound of the language they speak. Oftentimes, our neighbors become our enemies. And this, oftentimes, because we do not know them and we do not see the humanity in them. Our dear friend, Robi Damelin, from the Israeli-Palestinian Parent Circle, always says, when you see the humanity of the other, it is the end of the conflict. Knowing the other, knowing the others is a discovery, and therefore it requires a journey and not an easy one. This concept of a journey to discover the others is made very clear and very tangible thanks to another work of art, a work of art that Guido Bertagna himself as an artist, as a restorative artist, has drafted. Original drawings that Guido painted for a board game. Guido and I designed this game for children in El Salvador in the framework of a project for schools freed from violence. A project that has been funded by the Italian Agency for Development and Cooperation of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and a project run by the Italian NGO Sole Terre. So Guido, would you like to introduce us to your board game, Journey at the Discovery of the Other, of the Others?
I try. Well, in front of art we feel safe, so these children are teaching us how to stay in front of art. Not just mine, of course. The game is called Viaje de Descubrimiento de la Tierra del Otro, or del Otra. It's a board game. It has been created to help young people, but adults as well, to discover and to make a direct experience of the beautiful but challenging job, which always is building a good relation with others, good communities, good ways to be together. And it was created, as Claudia said, in the context of the project Escuela y Comunidades Inclusivas, Community Alliance for Social Inclusion and Prevention of Violence in the Chalatenango department of San Salvador. This game, the Viaje, fosters and asks for an authentic exodus. You have to live from yourself. you have to leave from your land to go and meet the others. You don't know the road, you don't know the time, you don't know what you will going to meet. And it also tries to help to reflect the necessary path one has to walk to reach, really reach, authentically reaching the others. It supports the understanding of different feelings one can experience when coming across others. There are many kinds of tensions, joy, incomprehension, every kind of conflict we have to face. Along with the game table, in fact, there is also another table which is called Map of Feelings. This other map is intended to help the players become more aware of the different emotional lands they encountered and the diverse feelings they went through when playing, while they were playing, especially, of course, when the game is accomplished. The players are set up in small teams, move from square to square by rolling dice, a similar pattern as in the Chutes and Ladders game. Along the journey, they go through and beyond several obstacles or unexpected tests or trials they have to get through and to jump over. And the game tries to foster an inclusive cosmovision. The other enters my own world, and in their turn, they welcome me in their world. By playing, the players have a chance to know the others better and make good experience also of law and rules and their deep meaning. A rule helps us comprehend and value, point out and protect dignity, the values of dignity, respect, loyalty, the value of democracy. Every player is invited to draft and learn by drafting the rules to live together. We learn, it's called the acuerdos de convivencia. In the game, and in several tests the player, they have to go through, great importance is given to words, particularly those words that define feelings and sentiments, in order to discover and rediscover the value of a deep, not stereotyped communication. That in turn can give words the strength to narrate, to name, to tell what happens to us, and also the emotions we feel. The game offers also the possibility to the players to build a personal narration and to wake memories up, find their own memories too, and acquire more friendliness in discovering the unknown land of the others. In the game, there is also a variety of landscapes, lands to cross, from gardens to rivers, from seas to mountains and sources, forests, even icebergs, which is not so common in San Salvador, of course. That's why the lands are symbolic ones. These have been particularly inspired by Maya culture and art. Maya culture and art is dominating, as well know, in the southeast Mexico area and the Central American countries, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, and also part of El Salvador. Just to recall one example of the Maya art and culture, it gave me so much inspiration. is the monster temple of Chicana in Guatemala, with its zoomorphic facade. Among the Maya, the representation of people coming out of the mouth of a snake or other similar very threatening animal is quite common. In the game, this monster face it represents fear and threat, a mouth ready to swallow, a personification of fear towards the others, particularly the fear being gobbled up by the others. Usually, alongside the game's square, this very threatening face, monster face, appears as a dream or as a nightmare, but not. It's not real. It never being real. It's always a nightmare. It's always in my imagination. It's the monster god that reigns at a deep level in our inner world, and it sits on the throne of fear, suspicion, prejudice. It must be identified and won by trust, courage, and positive memories, which the games try to support and to foster. And we can go back again to the map of feelings along the 63 square path of the viaje. Thanks. There's a map of feelings. It runs through exact the route of the game in other ways. It's intended to provide a complete and plain vision over different feelings, from joy to fear, from anger to trust, from hope to violence. So looking at the map of the feelings, mainly when the game is over, of course, it's better, and when the path, all the path has been completed, the players can become more aware of the inner lands they went through, the different landscapes, symbolic but real landscape they went through to identify and give them a name. At this stage, the role of the teacher or the facilitators of the game are particularly delicate and important because they have to help the players, especially young players, to go deeply into the experiences they have lived while playing. And finally, this game takes time. The players will probably need more stops and more restarts to complete the journey. Time is another silent yet decisive element of the viaje. Time devoted to play, but above all, time dedicated to the players. Hopefully, in getting over all the squares and while the viaje is accomplished, the players will become more confident to one another and more open. Maybe distrust or fear or maybe even shyness will have left a bit the player's inner world, and the openness will have taken the place. Hopefully then the game will have contributed to creating a new bonds among the players, and maybe without being fully aware of that, they will have tamed one another. So as the fox reveals to the little prince, everybody, I think, remember very well that, everybody will be more responsible for the one he or she will have tamed. So this is one of the, hopefully, one of the main goals of the game.
How very important this journey is for each one of us in this very moment where we tend sometimes to be grasped and held tight by the monster of fear, suspicion, and prejudice. So, Brunilda, would you like to play a little bit with Guido's artwork for all of us? Would you like to be our representative and testimony in the journey towards the others?
Sure, with Claudia, with pleasure. So when I actually first saw the game that you both presented, this was in a festival organized around the themes of solidarity, justice and repair at the European Forum for Restorative Justice. And beside obviously appreciating all the intentions and ideas that are embedded in the game, and it's difficult not to appreciate them, I have to say I was personally totally enchanted and touched by its beauty and its art. So, as Guido mentioned, El Salvador has had its indigenous art and culture destroyed by more than 500 years of conquest, colonialism, coup d'etat wars, massacres, and repression, something which has resulted in extreme impoverishment and violence. And above all, it has been the spirituality and the cosmology of the indigenous people, which is close to care and respect for others and for Mother Earth, that was being brutally repressed by the colonizers. So art seems to me vital for the cultural and social transformation for these people who have experienced more than 500 years of cultural repression. And obviously, this particular reality and heritage of the people, of the youth and of the children that you are talking about is also difficult to speak about. So art, I think, helps us again in that task, because art can speak also about things that are difficult to speak about or that are indeed unspeakable. And the incorporation of art in the concept of the board game seems to me to offer a unique space to engage with these concepts and feelings that may be otherwise very challenging indeed to explain or to talk about, such as issues of identity, oppression, conflict, violence, freedom, and so on. And there are many, many things I appreciate in this game. Given the time limit, I'll just mention a few, but I think we can really go on endlessly talking about this because it is really amazing. So the first thing I really appreciate in general is this kind of deeping that you have embedded in the game, from life to art to history to cosmology to personal life. And in a way, the art of the game then is, it seems to me, to deepen both a sense of self and expand the sense of community. And it is presented often as being opposite things to one another, but I think they go absolutely hand in hand. So a sense of self-determination and a sense of interdependency. It also invites children to develop a sense of their own agency as well as a sense of social responsibility towards others. So also it has a very strong intergenerational responsibility inside. Beside these two elements, I also think the game seems to involve the desire to communicate and share then this exploration and understanding with others. So it has a very strong communicative element. As you can see from the images that are being shown, which are fascinating, I think the absolute worth of the game are the rich images conveyed here through the work of art. And images by nature are polysemic, so they can have many meanings. And to give just one example, an image of two people shaking hands, as in one of the squares of the game, can obviously be interpreted as two friends, but also as two enemies. This can be a drug deal as much as a peace agreement. So in a way, images hold opposites simultaneously. And it is this polysemic nature of image in a way that opens then participants to in a way, different embodied understandings and understanding that there are many alternatives, many ways of being and experiencing and realities in the world. What I also appreciate in general in the game is that, in a way, it sort of combines, you mentioned there is a strong emphasis on the verbal, the importance of the words, and that's clear. But it also seems to me to embed in it acting, movement, song, and unexpected elements that in a way nourish spontaneity, awaken creativity, invite children to use their talents, and in that way, by doing that, they encourage a movement towards the symbolic and the imaginative, and a way for perhaps a very literal realism, which in this context is very hard, and the seriousness that is required by the idea of rules and laws. So it is these unexpected elements, creativity and the playfulness, which in a way prevent the play, and therefore also rules of conviviality, from becoming, let's say, heavily linear, settled, and unimaginative. More general, as you described the game, and I could really imagine myself being in it, with a group of people, it reminded me very much of Augusto Boal's Theater of the Oppressed. So the whole setting, the whole construction of the game, the whole concept. And Boal has said that art is a mirror that reflects reality, but it is also a magic mirror. So one we can reach into to transform the image into what we want it to be. And this idea also underlies the whole work done in the Theater of the Oppressed, and the artist in a way works from the real, from what is there, transforming it at the same time. And it is Paulo Freire that has linked the interaction between this kind of critical perception of reality, so not an uncritical perception, not reality as it is without that critical reflection, but this critical perception of reality has linked it strongly with imagination and hope. And just to quote him, he says, hope coincides with an increasing critical perception of the concrete conditions of reality. Society now suddenly reveals itself as something unfinished, not as something inexorably given. It has become a challenge, obviously, rather than just a hopeless limitation. So, having said that, I would like to close this reflection by saying that the critical imagination proposed and required here by people like Augusto Boal, Paulo Freire, but also by Guido and Claudia and their team, is indeed, according to me, critical for the work of justice. Because this critical imagination is one of the human faculties which has to be nourished. Because it is the fact, it is the lack of the critical imagination, or the lack of trust in this critical imagination, or the damage that is done to it, that in fact allows injustices, violence, and oppression to continue unquestioned.
Brunilda, you refer to self-determination and interdependency. These are requirements to play. We cannot play without them. And actually, have you ever thought how strict rules must be when we play? If we don't follow the rules, we don't play. But at the same time, these are rules that free, that liberate imagination and creativity. So self-determination and interdependency seem to us as the first bricks of the construction of justice, a sustainable, inclusive, and possibly beautiful justice. These two concepts reconcile responsibility or accountability with relationships with others. The task of justice in this perspective, in this other perspective, is not separation anymore. On the contrary, it is to take responsibility vis-à-vis the others and to build a different future with them. We are all under the same roof. The past can never be changed, but the future can. To write a different and a better future, imagination is needed. And in some situations, creativity, imagination, self-determination, and interdependency are a matter of life and death. So I give the floor to Gabrio, asking him if he wishes to tell us a few conclusive words from your perspective.
The aesthetic experience, the enjoyment of beauty and art, opens to the future through imagination and creativity, and foster an attitude not simply to accept, but to look for diversity, to strive for diversity. So aesthetic experience and enjoyment of art are somewhat connected with what is usually called the soft skills, the non-technical skills, so appreciated in social relationships and cherished in professional environment. I know some very wise manager who, when they look at the curriculum of a candidate to take a job, evaluate and appreciate artistic experience. If the candidate can play music, write novels, paint. Soft skills, yes. Non-technical skills, for instance, situational awareness, ability to speak other languages too, ability to negotiate, to accept the right compromise, and also to contribute to team working. Moreover, the long-term reasoning. But among the soft skills, I think that most valuable is the ability to find the right words. The right words. The words that name exactly the situation you are living in. And in this way, the words which do justice to people who feel acknowledged, recognized by these words. I think that in restorative justice, in the encounter during the restorative process, the mediator, the facilitator, should be endowed with these soft skills, and in particular with this ability to find the right words. But moreover, you should also try to infuse these soft skills in all parties involved in a restorative encounter, the offenders, the victims, and the community. Thus, we can say, going back to the genealogy of justice, that aesthetic is the mother of ethics. Aesthetic is the grandmother of justice, but it is also the grandmother or the great-grandmother of restorative justice. It's really a beautiful extended family, I think, of justice.
Thank you. So our journey into art and through art towards justice has come to an end for today, because the journey is endless, just as endless is the thirst for justice. After a journey, souvenirs are brought back home. So as a souvenir or as an intangible present for you, or a message in a bottle, as in one of Guido's drawing for the board game, our panelists, Guido, Brunilda, and Gabrio, have prepared a take-home message for each one of us. So, Guido, which is your take-home message?
So my take-home message should be this. I think restorative justice is the justice that gives the floor to the thirst and also make us feel the desire of that justice.
Brunilda, yours?
Yeah, so I'd like to end with a quote from Olivia Lang, who visiting the garden of filmmaker Derek Yarman, a garden he had constructed to, in a way, deal with the ending of his life. She reflects on what art can do for justice and for resistance, and asks, can you plant a garden to stop a war? It depends how you think about time. It depends what you think a seed does, if it's tossed into fertile soil. But it seems to me that whatever else you do, it's worth tending to paradise, however you define it and wherever it arises.
And Gabrio?
My very short message, in particular to young people, is let's proliferate, let's expand this beautiful, generative family of justice and restorative justice.
Okay, and my take-home message pivots around eyes and sight. And it is an invitation to remove the blindfold of the conventional iconography of justice. An invitation to see injustices, to see the thirst for justice, to make together justice visible and accessible to others, to engage in building forms of justice that are not blind and are instead far-sighted and therefore inclusive. So the journey is at the beginning, it is endless, so stay with us and follow us in the NEB project. Thank you very much.